Welcome back to the Shared Practices podcast. This is season 4 on case acceptance. And in this interview, we're going to take a little break from the case acceptance theme and do another kind of pre-ownership acquisition update. This is an interview with a listener of the show who is now a close personal friend, Dr. Alex Sharp. So Alex listened to our show, got the tools that he needed to find a practice. Took him a little bit, but in the grand scheme of things, really not that long, and found a practice and is crushing it. So we love this kind of feedback, these kind of interviews, because they show our audience that it's possible. It's possible for them, and that it is better on the flip side, that we love it when our listeners are doing better as practice owners than they were before being practice owners, and they enjoy it more, and they have more potential for growth, and they're happier. So fantastic interview. I really enjoyed hanging out with Alex here. Enjoy this episode. Here you go. Before we get into the episode, we want to take a moment to thank Blue Sky Bio for sponsoring this season of Shared Practices. Our listeners know I can geek out about Blue Sky Bio. This is something that I love and I'm very passionate about. But Blue Sky Bio has realized that for every one geek that exists that loves playing with all these pieces of software and merging files and designing these things, there's probably 4 or 5 dentists that really don't want to mess with all of that. They don't want to be the lab where they're designing their own guides, 3D printing, processing, cleaning up, clipping, trimming, inserting guide tubes. They really don't want to add that workflow by a 3D printer and truly taking the time to integrate this into their practice. Because of this, Blue Sky Bio has introduced something called Lab Pronto. This is truly the Uber of digital dentistry in terms of treatment planning, implants, surgical guides, ortho aligners. The way it works is once you're in the software with all the pieces that you need, there's a button that says Lab Pronto. You click on that, and now there's actually a list of labs with available time that you can choose to send your files to. They can help you treatment plan, they can help you print or design the surgical guide, whatever level you want to be involved with. If you want to do the design yourself and they print it, you can do it that way. If you want more help, if you want more of their involvement and less of your time, they can do that too. You are able to shop with a number of labs that are within Blue Sky Bio's network that understand what they're doing with this software and can really help you out by maximizing your time so that you can do more surgery, more ortho aligners, more patient care, and act less as a digital lab technician. To access these features, update to the latest version of Blue Sky Plan and just click the Lab Pronto button at the top of the software. I have with us today Dr. Alex Sharp. Thank you for holding up your name tag. We are at Voices of Dentistry, and we are in the creepy outside tent with no one here, but all the lights are on. It's like someone's getting married in half an hour, but
it's like a scene from The Shining.
Yeah, that's kind of the feeling I'm getting right now.
Where Jack is having the weird between different time periods scene where he's alone with the bartender and there's nobody there and there's like the ghosts that show up.
Yeah. It's because it's all very well lit. It's very spacious. Everything's like draped and fancy.
You know what you must do, Mr. Torrance.
Well, and we are stealing the Dental Hacks booth because they're too busy to record. They have to actually run the show. And we are using, it's kind of cold out here in Phoenix, so we're using Dental Hacks shirts as blankets and extra layers.
They won't mind.
No, not at all. I mean, it's Jason and Alan, like their faces plastered on large shirts. I think they're giving them away. They're having a hard time giving them away.
Well, they would want to be draped over us anyway. So
well, they are, and they're behind us. They're looming. So before George gets mad because we're bantering too much, Alex, tell me about your entry into the world of podcasting, because this day, the Voices of Dentistry conference, kind of marks like a 2-year anniversary for you.
Well, before I went to the original inaugural Voices of Dentistry meeting in Nashville 2 years ago, I had never listened to a podcast, much less a dental podcast.
You're one of those.
I was one of those uninitiated heathens. So I went to that meeting at the behest of my friend Jeff, who will probably listen to this episode.
Shout out to Jeff.
Shout out to Jeff. And after that meeting, my world changed because I saw the opportunity that came from owning your own practice, really becoming intentional about learning more about the field of dentistry beyond just being an employee, seeing all the benefits that you could have as an owner. And really, my eyes were open to what all was out there beyond just the four walls of the office that I was in. So I credit podcast with lighting a fire in me to do more.
Yes. How far were you out of school? Where are you from? Where'd you go to school?
So right now I'm almost 4 years out of school. I graduated from UT in 2015.
Yeah,
so
2015.
Go 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked for 2 years as an associate. And in those 2 years, I realized that owning your own office is the way to go. So I started looking for practices to buy. I started looking at places to do a startup. I did different demographic searches through Denographics, through...
Is that before going to Voices of Dentistry 2 years ago?
After.
After.
So that was after.
So 2 years ago, let's go back to just that moment when you're like, okay, discovered podcast. Mm-hmm. Before that, what kind of associateship was this for you?
It was a high volume Medicaid type situation where I got a lot of reps doing fillings, doing extractions, doing kind of basic dental care in a high volume, high paced setting. So I got a lot of reps.
Cool.
So I got comfortable with private practice. But then you hear about, okay, well, when you're an owner, then there's this thing called quote unquote passive income from Hygiene.
I never said passive income.
Yeah, quote unquote. Yeah. But the thing is, though, like as an associate, you're limited by what you can do with your own two hands,
sure.
Whereas you can leverage what other people can do as an owner. So go to the Voices of Dentistry 2017. After that, I started doing demographic searches to see potential areas to start up. And then I found out that in my area, there were some good areas to start up, but
what's your area?
Arkansas.
What part of Arkansas?
Central Arkansas.
Okay.
But I looked all over the state, and there are areas ripe for startup, but then per your podcast, per the recommendations of other podcasters, it seemed like if you can find a good practice to buy, all things being equal, there's more predictability in having that cash flow to establish from day one. Like I went to Breakaway.
Okay.
I took Scott Luna's course.
Startup or business masters? Startup. Okay. And so you're thinking startup, you're like, okay, and then you're like, well, maybe not. George and I kind of put a bug in your ear about acquisitions.
Right. And I think, like we talked about earlier, there's a time and a place for each option.
Yeah.
And the startup option can be right if you've exhausted all the acquisition possibilities.
Sure.
I mean, I took the Ike Erling approach of sending the different mailers out to all the retirement age dentists in my geographic area.
Could you buy the list in your state in Arkansas? Can you buy that list, or did you have to compile that manually from the website?
I compiled it manually from the dental board website. I just went through based on when the licenses were issued,
active or not.
Which, I mean, is probably not exactly accurate because there could be an older dentist that transplanted into Arkansas in 2001, and he really could have graduated dental school in 1985.
I never thought about that.
So it's not a foolproof way, but it was a quick and dirty way to say, okay, they live in this part of the state. They graduated in this year, presumably, and that's how I did my search. And I sent out probably 100 handwritten notes to different people saying, hey, this is me. I'm looking to buy an office. If you know anyone who might be interested in selling or transitioning out of ownership in the next couple of years, let me know.
I just want to point out that being from Arkansas, you had to compete with Hunter Smith and Will Little.
That's a fact. Yeah.
Scooping up all the freaking practices.
Which could be why that method that I just mentioned was so fruitless, because they obviously had their tentacles on everything.
You poor thing.
Yeah. I was up against a behemoth.
Just vacuum.
Yeah, the Hunter Will behemoth, where they already had the systems and the infrastructure in place to where, like, lowly old me had nothing to offer.
I hear they've infiltrated Indianapolis too. So
that's the word on the street. That's the rumor mill.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there.
Yep. I don't know if those Southern boys can handle the Yanks up there. We'll see what happens.
You know what? Maybe they'll just have a partner up there to like help them out or something.
Maybe they'll find somebody to run those offices for them and kind of take the load off of them. We'll see if they find someone though.
Yeah, kind of difficult. So you're sending out these mailers. You're not getting a lot of traction with the mailers. You've handwritten them. Like you didn't even like print them off. This is like you wrote these notes.
Yeah, I wrote the notes because to me, right or wrong, I felt like, okay, if I'm a 60-year-old guy getting a note from some punk kid, it may play a little better if it's handwritten because that appeals to their predispositions, maybe in some way. And I got several leads, but of those leads, most of them were small practices in professional buildings that don't have good visibility, maybe not the best demographics, limited room for growth. Maybe they had crappy leases. Maybe they were condos with restrictive
Oh.
agreements where you didn't have a lot of control. So,
But you're getting reps looking at practices.
yeah, it was great. It was a great experience. And then this weird serendipitous event happened where my dentist from when I was growing up, who was not of retirement age, he was younger, he happened to call me November of 2017 to say, "Hey, I'm going to be going into the mission field, and I want to sell my practice." So that just came out of the blue. I didn't even send him a note. He just remembered that I was a dentist and that I was possibly looking to own.
Yeah.
So fast forward a month and a half.
You're like hustling. You're doing everything you can to find an acquisition.
Yeah.
And then just out of the blue, boom.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm a big believer in that cheesy, hard to pin down karma of, like, if you put that much effort into the ether, into the universe, then eventually something's going to happen, and it's something's going to break in your favor eventually.
And it might even be the Army moves you to Indianapolis and you find 3 practices. I don't know.
It could happen.
Yeah.
It could happen. Stranger things have happened. But like with
I agree.
But with that, like for those of us that are so inclined, that are longtime listeners of the podcast, that know that ownership is the way we want to go, I'm convinced that if you really want it and you really want to get there, whether it's via an acquisition or via starting a practice, it will happen if you want it badly enough.
How long of a process was this for you from when you got turned on to podcasts, took Breakaway, started really consuming all this, and then you start looking and you're searching, you're mailing? What's the timeline here for you?
Now that you mention it, it felt like a lot longer, but it was really only a period of just over a year.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just over a year of nose to the grindstone, doing demographic reports, talking to people, sending out letters.
Which can feel like a long time, especially when you're hearing podcast episodes about new grads buying stuff and scooping stuff up.
Right. And that's the double-edged sword of the world that we live in now, where we have such easy access to information, where we hear these other stories and yeah, they can fuel your fire and they can inspire you to do more. But at the same time, you can't help but measure yourself against those successes that you hear about secondhand. And you're like, man, what am I doing wrong that these other guys are doing so well?
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with me that I'm not achieving those same levels of success in the same amount of time? But it all comes in its due time for everyone, if your mind's in the right place. Like, if you're listening to these podcasts and you're reading posts and you're doing your part to improve yourself and make yourself ready, then the opportunity will come.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that patience plus work and just belief that if you keep putting in the inputs, eventually the output will be the result, even if it takes some time.
Absolutely.
Do you mind me asking about debt loads? I don't know how bad your Arkansas school was.
So yeah, I mean, I'm right in that average range, or what's become average. I've got I graduated with just over $300,000 in student loan debt, and then practice purchase, that's right at $1 million, plus buying the real estate. So I mean, I'm 1.8 million in right now. Okay. But you have to think of that as the price of purchasing the engine that spits out the cash flow to be able to fund your lifestyle, your debt repayment, your savings. Because some people may say, well, I can find a really great associateship where I can make $250,000 a year and pay off my student loan debt comfortably, save for retirement. And there are those positions out there where you don't have the supposed risk.
It's an option.
Yeah, it's an option. Just like going military, going public health. I mean, there are other options that have different opportunity costs with them. But I think that if you put pen to paper, you realize that if you buy the right practice or you start up in the right demographic, then that's the best way to go, because you can surmount that debt load. You can save for retirement earlier, faster, more effectively.
Absolutely. So let's get into specifics with this practice. So what about this practice? You dropped your chocolate from the Dentist Money Show. It's a travesty, because it's a chocolate mint truffle deliciousness. Shout out to the Dentist Money Show.
We'll call it the 5-minute rule.
Yeah, you dropped it like mid-conversation. Things long ago. You got to find it. You need to turn your cell phone light on and find that chocolate.
We're in a dark tent. It's okay.
Here, I'm turning my light on. So what about this practice for you was like, holy crap, this is good. This could totally work.
Well, like you alluded to, I had the opportunity to look at several that for various reasons did not pan out. That they either weren't cash flowing well, or they were in a really poor visibility area. They were in a poor growth area. There was a lack of physical space for improvement, only 3 ops.
Sure.
There's so many reasons that a practice that you're looking at could be the wrong fit.
Okay.
And the temptation when you're looking for a practice to buy, the temptation is to see through rose-colored glasses.
I could make this work. Like this,
Yeah.
This could be
like
good.
I can see through the flaws to where I can justify it to myself. But it's really easy to paint yourself into a corner by doing that. And you have to have the wherewithal to say, okay, I can do better.
So I feel like there's an analogy that someone once told me for when you're dating someone with the intent to marry, that at that point is when people tend to have rose-colored glasses on, they're in love, and blah, blah, blah. Instead, that should be the time that you've got the most scrutiny on, because then once you get married, that's when you put the blinders on rather than the other way around. The same thing with a practice search. You need to assume the worst about this practice, because maybe there's details that this is the best face of that practice because the broker's glossed it up, or maybe the dentist is talking it up, or maybe they don't know what they're talking about. And then when you get into it, it's not exactly what you thought. And so if it was already so and you're trying to make the best of it, and then it turns out to be not as good as what you thought, then you could be screwed. So I want to go back to specifics. What did this practice look like? What was the number of operatories, the size of it, the collections, the procedure makeup? What was it about it that you liked?
So this was the first practice, the one that my childhood dentist contacted me about. This one was the first one that was over $1 million in collections.
Okay.
It had routinely collected 1.5, 1.6 million the past 4 or 5 years reliably. 2 doctor office, 2 full-time doctors, 3 full-time hygienists, and pretty basic procedure mix.
Three full-time hygienists.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. And so when you look at those numbers, when you break that down, you realize, okay, that's arguably underperforming for 2 full-time doctors and then 3 full-time hygienists.
Could do more.
So meat left on the bone, so to speak. There was some implant placement, not very many, but mostly bread and butter dentistry. Not a lot of endo, not a lot of sleep, ortho, nothing like that. Just basically bread and butter dentistry.
And the associate doctor, did you know about intent to stay on or not stay on or anything like that?
Yeah, the way that worked out was we were able to retain the associate doctor who was out of school for a few months at the time.
Okay.
And so I reached out to him and we were able to continue that relationship, and that's been great. That's been phenomenal as for someone to work with, because he was able to help transmit some of that goodwill that he had already gotten in the first few months.
Sure.
And so it has been a smooth transition, but I could also do a whole episode on what to do, what not to do in the intervening weeks between closing on the deal and then changing over to the new ownership, because my issue was it was a turnkey arrangement where the previous owner left, like dropped the keys off, here you go, have fun.
Okay.
And then I was there the next day. So
give us the highlights. What did you do? What do you wish you did? What would you do differently?
I was not.
Okay, wait. I apologize. I'm going to take one step back.
Yeah.
It was doing 1.5, 1.6?
Yes.
What was the asking price?
So the asking price was 1.08.
Okay.
So
that's great.
Per Hunter Smith's recommendations, because I texted him about it, it was about, he recommends not to nickel and dime the seller.
Yeah.
Because if you nickel and dime the seller, you run the risk of mutilating that goodwill that you're paying so much for. Because most of these asset allocations, when you buy a practice, it's over 50% is just goodwill. patient charts, and then less than that, usually about a third or 40% is the physical equipment and things. But most of what you're buying is just thin air, goodwill, and that can evaporate in a hurry if you handle it poorly. So my intent was to pay a fair price for a good practice.
I like that.
And that's what I highly recommend that people do. And here's the trick. If you feel like you want to nickel and dime on a practice, maybe it's not a good practice. If you feel like you're being asked to overpay for it, then maybe it's not worth paying for. Because Hunter always said in his episodes, like, okay, I'll pay an extra 10 or 15,000 if I feel like it's a good practice, because what's that in the scheme of things?
Right.
Absolutely nothing.
So in terms of getting financing, even though this is over $1 million, it's a decent price to collections ratio. It's like 60%, kind of standard.
Yeah.
So did you have any problems getting financing?
No.
Okay. Banks were just like, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, because if it's a healthy practice with a healthy prospectus, then if the bank knows what they're looking at, then yeah, I recommend going with a bank that you already have an existing relationship with. Because if you've worked with that bank and you have a relationship with a banker, then when they have the equation of you plus a cash flowing business, then they know the result is going to be success.
Totally.
And there are large national banks that you can go with that'll likely give you the money, but there's a lot more red tape.
So who did you go with?
I went with a local bank.
Oh, cool.
In Arkansas. Like, I shopped it with some of the heavier hitters in the industry, but there was a time crunch involved with my deal, and my local bank was able to get it done.
Cool.
Because from the time that I received the initial phone call that the seller wanted to sell, it was just around 6 weeks from that initial phone call to signing papers.
Because of the mission trip.
Because he was ready to go overseas.
Okay. So this practice like falls out of the sky into your lap.
Yep.
And you're like, okay, crap. Like, the nice part is, because you've been searching and wanting and evaluating, you can evaluate real quick, decide, hey, no, this is the right practice, and pull the trigger.
I knew that night, like when he gave me the financials, I knew that was it, because I had put in the reps of looking at several dogs before I found the one that I wanted.
So it's been a year. You're okay. So now I'll let you continue with what I cut you off before, which was that 2 weeks after transition, the turnkey. Here's the practice. See ya. What did you do well? What do you wish you'd done better?
I think for the most part, unless you're buying a practice that had done a lot of things very, very poorly, and you know that you're going to have to reconfigure the very basic way of doing things of the practice, it's good to lay low and tell the existing team that, hey, you guys have done things well for X number of years. Just treat me like the previous doctor and pretend that I'm the previous owner. And I want to learn how you guys do things, because that accomplishes several tasks in one. Number one, the patients see, okay, we have this same team. We don't have a lot of new faces. Most things are the same. We're not painting the walls. We're not changing things up. This is consistent. Even though the guy doing the stuff is different, it's still the same for the most part. And two, it tells the team that you respect the legacy of the practice. And that goes a long way in winning over the team, because I think that's, if you go about it the way that I did, which is to try to keep the existing team, to keep the patients that are attached to the team, then you need to win them over.
Yeah.
There are other philosophies that say, come in, rule with an iron fist.
Just, we're busted right now. We're using Alan Mead's equipment. He's walking in, and he sees us wearing all of his shirts and using them as blankets, using his podcasting equipment. Busted. So we're
screwed.
We're talking about his acquisition. He's how many months are you into it now?
Right at a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So what do you wish you'd done better? So it sounds like you kind of like kept things mostly the same.
Yeah, I tried to be a chameleon at first.
And kind of blend in.
And I completely recommend that you do that.
Okay.
If the situation calls for it. Yes. That was good.
Well, and the team is freaking out because they're like, new owner, what's he going to change? What's going to be different?
Yeah.
What are we going to lose? And they're a little worried.
Yeah. And what I was saying before Alan busted us was that if some people advocate coming in and saying, okay, I'm the new owner, you are no longer employed by the previous practice.
Yeah.
You are all without a job right now, but
I'm going to interview you.
I can interview you and you can sign on with these new terms. I feel like, maybe if the salaries are way out of whack, or maybe if there's just some inherent issues, then yeah. that may be justified, but that immediately drives a wedge between you and the existing staff.
Well, and if your style of leadership is that like you're gonna roll with an authoritarian, like at some point, like I've heard people hire people saying, I'm hiring you knowing that if I need to, I can fire you. And so that's kind of that conversation establishing that like you are not tenured. You are not guaranteed a job here. And if you do not perform, you will no longer have a job here. If that's the first impression that you want to make, fine. But what you were saying earlier with getting your team to know, like, and trust you, to then turn around and recommend to the patients, yeah, he's a good doctor and he cares about us. He cares about you. If they're in a state of fear, they're more worried about impressing you, which if that's how you want to lead, fine, that can work. But I think this way also works.
Well, at the end of the day, when you're the new guy, you need your team more than you know.
Yeah.
And when the going gets tough, you need your team to come to bat for you.
Sure.
And you do whatever you can to foment that trust. And you were asking, what's one thing I wish I would have done differently? I didn't have a really good idea of just how loyal some of our like long-standing hygiene patients were to their specific hygienist.
Oh, interesting.
Like there were, and this is something that I hadn't really heard talked about on podcasts before, but like of my practice that had 3 hygienists full-time, there's these contingents of patients that only wanted to see like each hygienist. So it's like a practice within a practice.
Yeah.
And so one of these hygienists happened to be on maternity leave as I took over the office. So I had to have a temp come in to fill in for her just to see those patients.
Yeah.
And that was really chaotic because there was a pushback immediately of wait, he sold the practice. The
new doctor, new
hygienist not there. So then there were patients that skipped the whole recall cycle.
That third of the practice was freaking out.
Yeah. And then they came back 6 months later when, maternity leave was over and they were due for another cleaning. So a lot of that came back, but I completely underestimated the relationship between the hygienist and the patient. And there's all these consultants and gurus out there that say, oh, well, you can just let a hygienist go, the patients will stay. Well, maybe, but that's if the doctor has a stable relationship with those patients too. Because right now the loyalty at the beginning was between the patient and the hygienist, not between the patient and the guy that bought the practice 2 days ago.
Yeah, no, that's a great point in that, yes, you can make changes eventually. Yes, if you have to fire people and hire people, that's what you got to do eventually. But at this moment in time, when trust is already being transferred, if things change too much, that can just be scary for the patients. And that extra push can spook them. At least it sounds like they didn't completely leave. They didn't leave the practice. Instead, they just took a little break and then they came back around.
Yeah, it was a weird phenomenon, but that's an important thing is do what you can to preserve that goodwill between you and your team.
Okay.
Because then they're that link between you and the patients at the beginning until you can form that relationship because they're vouching for you. When you come in to do a hygiene exam, I guarantee you that patient has already been like grilling the hygienist. Well, what do you think of the new guy?
Yeah.
What's the new guy like? And they're, the subtext of what they say is going to tell the story because they could say, oh, he's great, but their nonverbal communication, if they really are scared of you or they're freaked out, patients will catch on to that. So I think the first 6 months at least, you have to bend over backwards to make sure that you're being conciliatory, you're being fair to your team, you're being gracious and thankful, and you're exemplifying that you believe in the legacy of the seller. Like you almost have to be a little too nice in some ways. You have to be fair, you have to be firm in your expectations, but you also have to say like, look, I'm the new guy here. I want to learn how you guys do things so that I can take an accurate pulse and then learn how to grow and improve later on.
And I like that because it gives them permission to like not freak out and to get all on the same page, but then also with the expectation that there will be changes eventually. We're not, we're going to get there, but for now, let's keep things in place. I had the pleasure of interviewing the founder, CEO, president of Design Ergonomics, Dr. Ahern. And my assumption was always, if I'm not doing a startup, I'm probably not going to be hiring design ergonomics or really being involved with them too much personally. What I've realized is that they aren't a company that's just about floor plans or about products. They're a company that's all about maximizing efficiency. So they have training, products, resources for offices that are already established, but want to increase their productivity and take things to the next level. In fact, their dental reboot training, they actually have a guarantee that if you don't see a 20% increase in your productivity in the next 4 months, you get your money back on the course. So if you want a taste of this information that you can begin to apply, go to desergo.com, and on the upper right-hand side, it says work with us. Click on that, and there's a little drop-down that says Guide to Maximizing Productivity. It's a $230 guide that they are offering for free to the listeners of the Shared Practices podcast. So put in Shared Practices for the promo code. The beauty of Dr. Ahern teaching these principles is that, I was thinking, to work with design ergonomics as an established practice, I'd need to remodel my practice or buy a bunch of equipment. His thought is if you apply these principles, you're going to increase your productivity and your efficiency to the point where, you totally could afford to do a remodel if you need to, or you could afford to take more time off, or you could do whatever you want with that. But the fact is, these are principles of manufacturing, of efficiency from multiple industries that they've brought in and applied to dentistry. This is powerful training, and once you read the guide, you're going to realize, okay, I want my team on board with this, because that's really where the efficiency comes. That's when you go to dental-reboot.com, so Dental Reboot, and get the over-the-shoulder training. Your team is going to understand. There's going to be this light bulb moment where they get it. And efficiency, productivity, the way they do things, the wasted chair time, the wasted supplies, all of that goes down. To learn more, check out the links in the show notes for the Guide to Maximizing Productivity, a $230 guide that you're going to get for free, as well as a link to the Dental Reboot training. So you had one scare of these patients dropping off. Did you have any other early ownership, freak out moments where you're like, oh man, patients aren't showing up, or, other things?
There's always those times when you feel like the whole day is spent discussing the story of where the seller went, what he's doing now, why he sold. What's your story? What's your experience? Why do you look like you're 12 years old? Those kinds of things. But
you got some gray in your beard.
Exactly. That's my saving grace.
Yeah.
Right. But the thing is, you get past that first 6 months. The first 6 months are going to be uncomfortable because it's going to be nothing but those conversations over and over and over again. And you rehearse your talking points, and you get a little better at telling the story, because every longstanding patient wants to know, how did you get here, and what's the other guy doing now?
Right.
So you get good at telling that story over and over. And then once you get past that 6 month point, then it's yours.
Yeah.
And then you can really settle in and say, okay, I don't have to worry as much about making that initial first impression because I've met most everyone.
Totally.
And then you can start pivoting and saying, okay, I'm going to make this minor tweak here, this adjustment there. And then you can really start to make it your own.
So what for you was there any immediate low-hanging fruit where you came in and you're like, you know what, we're going to try and keep everything the same, but I want to change this?
The first thing was procedure times.
Okay.
The previous owner scheduled what I felt like was an exorbitant amount of time for most procedures.
That's awesome for I would rather that than the opposite.
Oh Lord, yeah.
I'm scared of, getting a practice where they were lightning fast and efficient.
15-minute crown prep.
Cutting corners or, maybe they're just that good. But yeah. So that's actually a nice change to make right up front.
No, it was really good because the previous owner, the scheduling was far from optimized on the doctor's side. There wasn't any concept of any kind of PDA style scheduling or even provider time scheduling. It was just sort of single column,
block,
throw whatever in the schedule. And so I introduced the concept of, let's look at doing some PDA style, like rocks, pebbles, sand kind of scheduling.
Okay.
Which has helped.
And you also did provider time scheduling?
I haven't done much provider time. I've seen a lot of practices that do that. So I expected that to be sort of maybe the default that they went with, but there wasn't much of a unified theme.
Okay.
So I came in and said, let's try this to do more in a day
Okay.
potentially.
Cool.
And that's worked
It's
pretty
worked
well.
out.
Yeah.
What other changes have you made? So that was kind of initially you changed that up front. What else have you done to either grow or improve the practice?
Well, one thing we noticed early on was that we were scheduling way too far out for new patient exams. And we've traditionally scheduled new patients to be seen in hygiene first, like if they don't have a chief complaint.
Okay.
And there's different schools of thought on that. And I've looked at seeing the patient in the doctor's side first, and then seeing what type of cleaning they need, and then schedule them in hygiene. But what we did to mitigate that was start doing some assisted hygiene, where 1 day per week, each hygienist does an assisted column
Okay.
where we see, your garden variety prophies, your recall patients staggered with the help of a hygiene assistant. So
these are your pre-existing patients, your regular recalls, so that the rest of their schedule has some more holes and openings.
exactly. So like say I have a full-time hygienist that works 4 days a week, and then she has 1 day where she does assisted hygiene. On that day, she will only see like 1 hour appointments, and she'll see her normal column of 8 1 hour appointments, but then there'll be a second column staggered in there of 6 more appointments that she'll see with the help of a hygiene assistant.
And are you doing do you line those up with your days in terms of exams? Like, how do you do that?
We're pretty indiscriminate about that right now because between myself and my associate, we can handle
The higher volume.
the higher volume. Like we're equipped to do that. But that has been overall, it's been a success. Like that was a bit of a change for the existing hygienists to get used to, but they've been good sports about it.
Okay.
And when you structure the compensation such that they can quote unquote bonus based on adjusted production,
Right.
then that's an easier sell
Okay.
to them too.
They like those days in terms
they're
of
like, oh yes, assisted day, good.
yeah, paycheck wise.
Exactly.
So one thing I know a doc who did a startup and has implemented assisted hygiene, and he said and I think he does it more often than not, like that's their default. He said one thing he's noticed with that is that the case acceptance goes down on those days because the hygienist just has less time with the patient and therefore less ability to build that relationship and close cases and things like that.
I could see that. And we've toyed with different ideas to try to, remedy that. Like if there's a fairly complex treatment plan that comes in, or someone has a question about cosmetics or question about ortho, then
J-Lips is making fun of us stealing his station. We're honoring you because we're using your shirts as blankets. Yeah. Yep.
Your face is on my chest right now.
It's massive. Note to editing: please edit this section out, or leave it in. We don't need editing.
Screw it. We'll do it live.
Yep, that's right. Do it live. So you could see that where assisted hygiene could be not ideal in terms of
right. And again, going back to like I talked about earlier about how the first 6 months of the practice there was a lot of kinks to work out. Just like with this first recall cycle of assisted hygiene, we're putting notes in the practice management software to say, okay, this patient, because they needed more time for X reason, would be better seen in the non-assisted traditional day.
So it's almost like the A+ patients, the ones who've never had a cavity and have perfect gums and they just brush and floss all the time and never have any needs. Those are the perfect patients for assisted hygiene.
You hit the nail on the head. Okay. And that's what we're learning is that certain patients, if they're 21 years old and they've never had a cavity in their lives and they do great, perfect assisted hygiene patients.
Okay.
It's you don't, for us, we don't schedule perio maintenance on those days because it's more hygienist intensive.
Okay.
We haven't been scheduling the full new patient exams on those days just because we want to be sure to have plenty of time to develop and build rapport with those patients. We probably could figure out a way to do it, but we just haven't yet. And we just try to keep it like normal routine recall patients in those assisted hygiene days because it's just a little more frenetic with the pace.
Talk to me about, do you remember the ratio of doctor production to hygiene production when you bought?
Yeah, it was roughly between 1/4 and 1/3 hygiene production.
Okay, 30 25 to 30%,
Yeah.
somewhere in
Yeah,
there.
somewhere it was probably right around 30% of
Okay.
hygiene production, which from what we know from your podcast, that's a healthy number because it means that there was not a lot of overdiagnosis going on the doctor's side.
The doctor wasn't carrying the weight of the entire practice on his back.
Right. And to take it a step further, there were still a lot of 2, 3, 4 surface fillings being done compared to full coverage crowns.
Right.
So there was a tendency to patch things, and Ergonomics doing the big MODB LWTF
Yes.
amalgams, and so there's a preponderance of crowns available to be done without having to work too hard. Because
Right.
another thing too is the first year, I did not go out of my way to say, well, Mrs. Jones, you need 8 crowns.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was more likely to say, look, there's several teeth that Dr. previous owner had been keeping an eye on for several years.
Yeah.
And these are teeth that very likely will need work in the next few years. But right now, everything looks stable.
Right.
And
You're planting that inception.
Yeah.
You're putting the future need for treatment in their mind.
And it lets them know that I'm conservative because I'm not forcing them to do so much treatment. I don't want them thinking like, wow, this new guy really needs to make his boat payment or whatever it is.
Were they doing intraoral photography at all before? Like,
very sporadically, but we made that
standard
for us because those teeth that had been under quote unquote watch, we have taken intraoral photos of, and I say, hey, here's what this looks like today. Next time I see you, I'm going to compare it with how it looks 6 months from now. And if these cracks, these fractures look like they're becoming deeper, more nefarious, I'll recommend this treatment.
It's a good word. Nefarious.
Yeah, I throw that one out every once in a while.
I like it. So it was a healthy hygiene base. It was bread and butter. It wasn't too tightly scheduled. A lot of work left on the table. So just by coming in and tightening up the schedule, added assisted hygiene, sounds like that stuff alone has the potential for some growth there.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, the first full year, I replicated the revenue from the previous years. I didn't grow it. I replicated it. And a lot of it was because I did soft pedal a lot of the treatment recommendations just because I felt like that was a good way to maintain the goodwill. And again, there's different schools of thought on that, because if you listen to Derek talk about it, he's more of the mindset of lay it all out and let the patient decide.
Yeah.
And I think that can work. And there are certain personality types of patients that do well with that.
Yeah.
But for me, from a risk management standpoint, I just felt like with my Southern conservative patient base, I wasn't willing to risk that of me freaking them out and them bolting.
Yeah.
And maybe I could have been more forward about some of those things, but my eye was on the long game.
So talk to us about then, like, was the overhead overall, like, are you willing to dive into numbers on this?
Sure.
What was your overhead after this first year?
Overhead was right around 68%, 70%.
Okay.
Right in there. And I mean, as you know, like when you have an associate, the overhead takes quite a steep jump. But also too, you have to factor in, like, if you're a new owner, a lot of times you're going to have a consultant, a lot of times you're going to have a coach, a lot of times you're going to be investing in CE.
Yeah.
So you can lower that overhead the first year, but for me, I was more about, okay, let's invest in myself, let's invest in the practice, let's get where we need to go to where, 5-10 years down the road, we're more or less on cruise control, rather than saying, well, man, I really cut it down to 52% overhead that first year,
right? But
at the cost of maybe building for the future. So there's a fine line there where I've just been of the mindset of saying, okay, let's think about what can I do this year to put myself in a good position 5 years from now.
Okay, so with that then, one of the things that George has talked about with buying a larger practice is that your actual production, if you looked at your production and what you take home, your fixed overhead with a larger practice is usually paid for by the hygienist and the associate doc. And so by the time you actually produce, you're actually keeping more of that. Did you feel like that was the case in your practice?
I would say so. Yeah, I would say so. I hadn't thought of it quite in those terms, but when you put pen to paper and you think, okay, if your hygiene base is roughly a third of your practice, and then your associate is producing at a fairly high level, then yeah, I mean that covers your fixed and maybe even some of your variable expenses too. And then if you pay yourself, I think the phrase is like the replacement salary. Like if you pay yourself as if you were an employee dentist,
Right.
and then you add on your owner profit, then yeah, I think you can reap a fairly good percentage of what you actually produce. I'd have to put pen to paper on that to see exactly what that was, but I would wager to say that as an owner, if your overhead's in check and you have an associate and you have a robust hygiene base, then you do keep a higher percentage of what you physically generate.
Okay, cool. No, that's good. And yeah, now it's an experiment. You get to go home and like
Exactly.
play with those numbers and think about that.
Right.
So I'm gonna dive deeper, and this is you get to call the uncomfortable button if you need to. So one of the things that's been useful on some of our episodes has been when people kind of open up about numbers and talk about numbers. So let's talk about some debt payments. So you've got a monthly student loan payment.
Yep.
You've got a practice loan payment, and you've got practice overhead. What do those look like for you? Like just so that someone understands what it means to buy a $1 million practice.
So for me, the $1 million practice translates to right at 11,000 a month
Okay.
for the payment. And then if you turn around and buy the real estate, then that can be another, at least $3, $4, $5,000 if
Okay.
you buy the real estate.
So we're looking at like 15 there between the loan for your practice and the real estate loan for the real estate.
Right. And then the student loan payment is where there's still some flexibility based on if you do the income driven repayment versus
Are you doing repay or pay? What are you doing?
Well, when I was an associate, I went ahead and signed up for that repay program, and then I've been waiting to refinance.
Okay.
I'm going to do that this year.
Cool.
And get on like a fixed lower interest rate to repay that like faster.
So what was like during that year? What were some of your payments for the repay as an owner?
Well, see, it was still based on
Your associate
my
production,
associate, so it was a lower payment,
which is great.
which is great for the short term for cash flow.
Right.
Long term, you don't want to do it.
Right.
But in terms of like if you're saving for a down payment for a practice or you're saving, then it's a smart thing short term. Long term, you just have to be cautious about, the tax bomb at the end of it, which is the big risk with the income driven repay.
So what
option.
what did it look like for you?
It's like $1,100 a month.
Okay.
On that.
That's not bad.
Right. But
you don't want to do that long term.
No, you're treading water
Right.
by doing it. But so like this year, now that I own my real estate, I'm going to go ahead and refinance and then just knock it out over the next 10 years.
Okay. So then what was like the overhead, the monthly costs of the practice?
Monthly cost of the practice was right at about 90,000.
Okay. So the 10K or 15K of loans from the practice, the negligible 1,100 of student loans. So your monthly nut to crack is just around 100.
6 figures.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy to think about?
Yeah, and you always hear about as an owner you get paid last, but
Yeah.
there was never a more true statement uttered than that.
So above and beyond that, what would your monthly take home look like? And this is where we're getting personal, and you can push the uncomfortable button.
And again, this is where looking at my year-end numbers, you realize the ramifications of investing in a ton of CE, investing in a coach, investing in these things that maybe aren't quite necessary.
Sure.
Because like I could have taken home easily another 70, 80,000 had I not invested in CE or invested in coaching, because I was able to take home north of 300.
Okay.
But again, it could have been more, but I'm investing in the future.
Sure.
And I tell everybody, like, live in a more modest home, pay off your vehicles, don't do anything extravagant, because everything you do like that's the consumer debt, that's the non-essential debt, it's just an extra source of stress.
That's fantastic advice, especially when you don't know how things are going to ride out and those little bumps. But I just want to show people that, and I really appreciate you opening up about that, because even if your student loan is, say you refinance and make it a 10-year loan, and now your monthly payment's $5,000 or $6,000, a $5,000 or $6,000 payment in the context of your $100,000 of a monthly overhead and practice loans is reasonable.
Yeah.
And if you want to get more aggressive with it, you can. If you don't want to get more aggressive with it, you can pay it off in 10 years and it's not going to go anywhere.
Right. And so that's the lesson there is if you find a practice to buy that does cash flow fairly well, great, go for it. And if you find a practice to buy that doesn't cash flow as well, either have a plan to get it cash flowing well, like have a series of events that you know that you can check off to get it there and know that you can live below your means at the time, or do your demographic research and find a startup and get in for fairly cheap to have a plan to get there, because you just don't want to overstrap yourself, overstress yourself, and stretch yourself too thin with your living expenses to where, oh crap, we're having a crisis because I bought a practice that was too small and it can't support my lifestyle.
No, absolutely. So one last thing, we got time for just like another quick topic. So you hired Justin Short as your coach for this first year.
Oh yeah.
What was that like for you, and what was the value there?
So Justin has been phenomenal to work with, him and Derek both. I mean, they are uniquely able to walk you through those rigors of going from being an associate to being all of a sudden, okay, now I'm the owner that's in charge of X number of people. And they're able to coach you on the nuts and bolts of getting from signing the papers to running a practice to dealing with insurance to dealing with case presentation to dealing with staff conflicts.
Yeah.
I mean, they're really good at just really hammering home those fundamentals.
Cool.
And I hired Justin, full disclosure, before I closed on the practice because I wanted his help in
the transition,
like navigating that transition. Like, when do we tell the staff that I'm going to be the new guy? When do we break that news? And there's so many things like that in the lead up that if you've never done it before, you're like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like, if I choose the wrong thing here, then I could completely alter the trajectory of my practice for the rest of my career.
Sure.
So it was good to have him in my corner, coaching me, telling me what to do, what not to do, telling me what to say. And he was just a great resource in that time, especially.
That's cool. Well, and I think George is doing the same thing. He found a lot of value from Justin, and now he's looking at other options for year two. So I think there's a time and a place for everyone. And so it sounds like for you, it worked out really well. Now you're working with someone else. So now who's kind of replaced Justin for you?
Well, right now I'm working with someone who's more of a clinical mentor, because I think it's really important. The first year plus, you have to get those practice management, business, checking overhead, checking expenses. You have to get comfortable with all those things. And then for me, coming out of school, not doing a Army residency like some people, I'm trying to expand my clinical suite of offerings. So I'm working with Wade Pilling right now to be kind of a clinical mentor to help me to develop my photography skills, my case presentation skills, my clinical skills, to hold me accountable to get better clinically.
And he's having you tell me what you told me earlier.
He's like, hey, send me a picture of your crown preps today. I'm like, okay, fair enough. But no, it's great because that guy is like the gold standard for
quality.
Well, everything, but quality especially. And he'll tell you if it's
Spartan races.
Yeah, I'm doing one of those too.
Are you? He's got you on board.
I'm going to Montana and doing one in May.
Oh, that's awesome.
So hopefully we'll survive that and get through it. But
well, I like that you've hired a coach to work on the area that you feel like you need the most help on at this time. And that's going to change. And after maybe you're working with Wade, maybe you're working with someone else. But I think that's brilliant that you've kind of shifted gears and found someone who's not just a business coach, who's also a clinical coach.
Right.
How about hiring the Dentist Money podcast folks, dentist advisors?
Yeah, I actually started working with Reese and Ryan back in August. So about halfway through my first year, I had listened to their podcast for a year and a half by that point. And I realized that what they had to say about hiring like a fee-only advisor that's fiduciary, that's not a broker, that's not a
insurance salesman
that's going to make a massive commission off of what you invest in. There's a lot of value there, and they're upfront about saying that, like, you don't have to hire an advisor. Like, you could do it all yourself if you have the time and the wherewithal and the motivation. But for me, I was more of the mindset of, I want to be sure that I get my foundation like rock solid.
Yeah.
and it's worth it to work with guys like that
Do
can
you
help you.
do you feel like with their Elements platform that you like are really comfortable with how you're allocating that money that's coming in from the practice?
Yeah, and it's completely transparent on their software. Like they go through one element each month, and they look at your total term, meaning how long do you have till you meet your retirement goals. And then they
Cool.
look at your net worth, and they look at your how well insured are you in terms of life insurance and disability insurance. Like they look at one thing each month, and then you can go on their platform and you can see what you're doing budget wise, how you're doing on your savings rate, and they make it really easy to know, like, okay, all my different buckets
Yeah.
are being filled
Cool.
properly.
No, that's really good to hear because I recommend them all the time. And so same thing with like practice ownership. I'm like, how's that going? I hope
Right,
it's
right.
okay. Same thing with dentist advisors. Like I want to talk to people who actually like them and have used them and see if they agree. So I'm full disclosure, not paid by them, but planning on hiring them. Well, we're getting close to that 55-minute mark. We should have, stopped 5 minutes ago, but we're having too much fun. So maybe we'll cut out some of the heckling from our gracious lenders of equipment to us so that we could record this podcast. But thank you for being open and sharing some stuff with us today and sharing your journey. And I think it just I kind of like that your journey took a year, because I think that just gives perspective to people. If you just keep doing these things and you know what you're looking for, you're willing to turn down opportunities that aren't worth it, then when that right opportunity comes along, you can pull the trigger and it works out.
Well, you have to be persistent, and it's a lesson in how when you really want something so badly, it can feel like it takes an eternity, but in reality, it's a year or 2 years or whatever. But thank you for all that you do for the profession and inspiring everyone. And I apologize for giving you your most disjointed podcast episode ever.
No, I'm trying to think who's been definitely disjointed. You are nowhere near anywhere near the close to the most disjointed. That was great. And I love your story and your journey. So thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Richard.
Yeah, no problem. We'll see you. Okay, that was a ton of fun. Alex is great. Please feel free to reach out to him on our Facebook group if you have further questions. Like I said, this is just fun for me. This is like my favorite part of all of this is when it comes full circle. You guys see proof of concept. I get to make new friends, and then hopefully this inspires you to go do exactly what Alex did. Big thank you to everyone in February who gave us some testimonials. The ultimate winner ended up being Dr. Danielle Davis. And I tried really hard to just be like, okay, she's a classmate of mine. I don't want to be biased. But her video that she submitted had the most compelling story. And she went from being very in debt with her and her husband to opening a startup because of our show, because of an episode that George put out there about demographics that really lit a fire under them. They were super talented, amazing people, but we just gave them a little boost and that's all they needed. And now they're doing great. So you'll see these videos kind of drip out over time on social media, and there is a playlist of them as well. If you guys still want to submit a video testimonial, that would mean the world to me. We don't have any other contests at this time, but it was really fun to see these videos and to see the experiences that people have had. And then lastly, we are now, as of, what's the date right now? The 21st of March. I think this happened like 3 days ago. We are now the #1 rated useful dental podcast in iTunes. And I say that because Working Interferences with Lance Timmerman and Joshua Austin is still has surpassed everyone, and they're in the 300s, the #1 rated dental podcast. But I think they would agree that if we applied the adjective useful, then their show would no longer be in that same group. They're all crudeness and entertainment. So if you're into that, if you want the Howard Stern of dentistry, they'll hook you up. But no, we just barely passed dental hacks. So thank you guys so much. It really does mean a lot in our ability to support the show and keep going. So thank you for your reviews. And anyone who hasn't, please continue to leave them. We will talk with you guys next week. I've got some exciting updates soon that I can talk about, but still not quite there yet. We'll talk with you next week on the Shared Practices podcast.